Hey everyone, this is Craig. Thank you once again for spending another hour with Acid Horizon and avoiding the deluge of dross elsewhere online and the slurry of AI-generated content that is being used to train present and future surveillance technologies. It is you who keep this project alive, and if you want to help it grow, consider joining our Patreon at the $5 level. We've got something special on the menu in the coming weeks, a new reading group on the politics of friendship. Derrida, Blanchot, and many others will appear in this reading group. It hasn't been officially announced yet, but if you are a member of our Patreon, you'll get first access and open invitation to dive in with us. Now, on to today's episode. We are joined once again by the inimitable Taija Mars McDougall to explore ketamine, techno-fascism, and the intoxicated subjectivity of the billionaire class. From Musk to the dream world of AI hallucinations, let's take a trip into a world where the trip might take you.
White lines running through my mind. Don't do it. Unless, of course, you are the Silicon Valley right with such brilliantly big-headed people as Mark Andreessen and, I don't even want to say his name, but might as well, Elon Musk. Because today we are talking about not cocaine, actually, but ketamine, the new depression treatment that's also more or less becoming the entheogenic, ecstatic little line that lets techno-fascists get up in the morning when really they shouldn't. And to talk about this, we're actually rejoined again by Taija Mars McDougall to talk about her actual article, King Ketamine, for the excellent Parapraxis Magazine. Taija, welcome back to the show.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for bringing me back. Excited to find out what kind of weird DMs I'm going to get this time.
Oh, God. Right, okay. To the listeners, fucking behave. You know?
Yeah, bro, take me to your dealer.
You know what? As long as they're not asking me for feet pictures, it's fine. I don't have a hookup in California, so don't ask. No plugs, nothing like that.
Yeah. So just what to start off with? So why start off with a drug like ketamine? Because I know it's been having a lot of prevalence recently as a therapeutic drug, but also as people like Musk recently admitted, kind of the thing they're on all the time whilst they're destroying sort of the foundations of liberal imperialism as we know it. Mostly the liberalism part and not the imperialism.
Yeah. So the reason I got kind of invested in looking at and starting, like, this is really preliminary, right? And looking at ketamine in particular was because at a certain point I was up close and really personal with a ketamine addiction, and not mine. I've used ketamine, but I never had a serious issue with it. But I did watch someone sort of go through this. And one of the things that I noticed was, first of all, that there was this idea that it was non-addictive, that you could not become addicted to it. And to be really clear before I even continue, right? It's like, I'm not anti-drug. This isn't about like, oh, do no drugs. This is just simply like the idea that ketamine is like a non-addictive, non-troubling drug, that it has no negative effects, is just not correct. So that was like the first thing. And then the other thing I noticed as I was sort of bearing witness to this person moving through an increasingly scary ketamine addiction was that he was reaching levels of like psychosis as they were on it all the time. And part of that psychosis was this really strange inability to not recognize being in slop world. That was the thing. Slop ideas, slop, like AI, slop, all this stuff to this person as he was really struggling with this addiction just felt real to him. And he could in no way differentiate between what was real and what was slop, what was an intelligent thought and what was like a fucking, like a Yarvin-esque bozo thought. Couldn't differentiate. And this is a smart person who can differentiate. So I was like looking at this and I'm wondering like what, because, cocaine doesn't really do that. It might make you feel like your ideas are really great, and your own ideas especially, but it won't do the like somebody else's bullshit ideas are amazing. And it's a thing I have to go after, and it's real. It didn't do that. I've not really seen other drugs do that way. And then I heard someone sort of echo this about this idea. Ed Zitron, actually, he sort of said, like, yeah, it's like all these guys who are on ketamine all the time are just like living in slop world. And that really is what set me off on like looking at ketamine a little bit. That's really the beginning of it. Is like it's both personal, the floating around of other people's ideas, and then just being a long-standing hater of these freaks that are buzzing around Palo Alto.
Oh, that's fascinating because, yeah, I mean, in my very limited experience with ketamine, not sort of super intense, but, usually it's just if you want to be drunk without drinking, but sometimes it can be more like if you do a bit more than that. I remember once feeling like I was in VR, that I was sort of slightly dissociated. And when you talk about sort of the subjectivity of the tech bro billionaire being one that is so aligned with ketamine, it's almost like the experience. I mean, you draw this parallel. The experience of ketamine is almost like the experience of being in someone's position financially when they're in that kind of tech bro state. And I guess in that sense, you want to sort of unpack in a way the line, I guess, no pun intended, that is drawn between sort of the tech bro financial consciousness of where you are just presented with slop, especially if you're paying for it, and no one can say no to you because no one's got any money unless they're being paid by a wanker like you, as like Mark Andreessen or fucking Balaji or Musk or whoever. I mean, how does ketamine in a way, how does it exemplify that kind of subjectivity and also amplify it?
Like I say in the article, there is a lot of the focus on dissociation, right? And that like ketamine will allow you to sort of pull back from your usual subjectivity. And I think there is something to this. Other people have said that it is like the drug version of the social media experience. I think this is a little bit closer because I think a lot of these guys are they're as social media poisoned as the rest of us, because this is where their bread is getting buttered in a lot of ways, right? It's where they are able to, if not just monitor, also bark up the sentiment around their stock prices. They're not just allowed, they're able and permitted to become the carnival barkers that ensure that they can hold these financial positions that have unlimited upside, totally limited downside, that they can actually make a bunch of money off of the fact that the stock prices are themselves moving, not just that they're going up, that they may go up, they may go down, right? There is something about the experience of ketamine. And I don't just mean like I went out on a Friday night and had a good time with some ketamine. I'm in long-term, constant use. It's not just dissociation, and it's not just the social media experience. It comes to this idea that what you are doing is, and I say this, is in some way divine. Barking up your stock price is a divine mission. Dismantling the administrative state is a divine mission that you're on. And like, it's not that I just think ketamine is what's behind all of these guys doing this. I think it's bringing out and amplifying an impulse and a drive that is already hard at work in them, that has already rewarded them in many, many ways. But now with the accelerant of ketamine, they get to feel like they are gods and kings all the time.
And when it comes to, I mean, yeah, it's going back to even the bare root of psychedelia as soul revealing, and then revealing the souls of the worst people currently alive. But in terms of I mean, as you said, you described the sort of certainty that it gives them, and in terms of the certainty that they are divine, that they are powerful, that they really are the image they have to sell, that they've completely collapsed into the social media image, which they're already incentivized to identify with through these platforms. They see themselves as divine, but always against someone else. And you pick up on the phrase from Mark Andreessen, the techno-optimist, "We are not savages." I mean, what is the savage in the mind of the tech bro? I mean, we sort of have got an idea, especially given Musk's South African origins. But can we unpack sort of who they're defining themselves against a bit?
Yeah, I think this is complicated because they are defining themselves in the way that, you know, and Elon Musk told on his son yesterday that they are defining themselves against Black people. Like, yes, I do think that is the case, but they're also defining themselves against Black people such that they can also define themselves against everybody else. They're using, in a certain way, there's this capacity to use the Black person as a testing ground, a means to do some research and development on what can be gotten away with. And this is the savage. Anybody can take that. The savage of Andreessen's techno-optimist manifesto, not just, you know, that's the primitive. Black might be the archetypical primitive in this case, but it's something that can be any person who is not them, any person who is not part of their strategy, that is not on their side that way. Anyone who is, it's a position that can be opened and loosened beyond Black people. But Black people, I think, are the prototype.
Yeah, and you see that a bit too with the most recent pulling of funding from the University of Pennsylvania, because they allowed a transgender athlete to participate in sports there. And it's like killing two birds with one stone. Not only do you get to punish them for doing that, but now you get to pull funding from academia.
Yeah, I mean, Columbia, one of their proposed punishments is putting not just like Middle Eastern studies or I think it's also Asian studies in academic receivership, whatever the fuck that means, but it's also African studies, right? It's not like, even if Black people aren't currently the conscious target of ire and violence right now, these are people who are obsessed with Black people at the end of the day. Like Musk, Teal, anybody who's had long-term relation, any white person that's had a long-term relation with South Africa, you gotta really watch that person. You gotta monitor them. Because at the end of the day, and especially of that era, these are people who were the most privileged people on the planet for a huge period of the 20th century. The most privileged. And I don't mean that in the you know, the very banal, you know, check your privilege. I mean, they were the most powerful people in relation to the other people in their country. The whole international community focused on South Africa to try to protect this small group of insane settlers. And Musk, Teal, they all have relations with this. You got to watch those people.
I'm going to bring it back to drugs very quickly. I want to know more about ketamine. It's been literally decades since I've had a radically mind-altering substance. I mean, I'm not going to say what I've had on the air here. However, the question that I have is, and it's almost a cliche that every generation has its own drug of choice. Ketamine, of course, is something that has come into the collective purview, you know, rather recently in comparison to other things. And I'm wondering what it is about ketamine itself. We've talked about already how the experience that one has, or one of the possible experiences that one can have while on ketamine, is a kind of psychic reorganization that has this leveling effect between the imaginary and the real. You talk about this kind of univocity of all things, whether they're slop, whether they're real, or what have you. And I want to talk about your dream, but we'll get to that later. But the thing that I really want to know about is, how does ketamine itself tie into risk-taking, financial over-leveraging, ideological shifts, national and global paradigm shifts? And why does ketamine do that over, let's say, something like cocaine?
Yeah. The thing about cocaine is that I think it will propel you to take certain kinds of risks, as your ideas are the best ever. If you take enough, you get that sort of effect where you are, one person described it to me as, you're the tallest person on earth. I've not quite had that experience, but I know what they're referring to. This feeling that the thoughts that you are having are great, but it's not the idea of the risk-taking behavior of like the Wall Street cokehead is not the same thing, I don't think, as the divine mission of the financier capitalist on ketamine. I don't think this is quite the same thing. It's not the idea that your ideas are the best, right? And I've already sort of said this, but it's something else. It is that the things that you have come across, the things that you see, you're the only one who could see them. This is different. It means that the idea of risk-taking, of over-leveraging is not quite the same thing as what's thriving out of the 80s with cocaine. It is it's where that is so much about the idea of risk itself. Ketamine, I think, is about, I will do anything to enact what I think is the correct and real thing. This is different. It's subtly different, but it's different. I will not just do anything. I will take any set of positions because I don't really see a difference in them. I will take any set of positions such that I can enact my political will, not just like, I'm going to make the most money possible. We're watching Musk's, like Tesla, fall apart in real time, right? He really might completely, because it's not just that he's over leveraged financially, which would be the sort of cocaine idea. He's over leveraged politically and not able, and because of this flattening effect, is not really able to see that these are things that will move against each other, that the risk could actually overtake him. And this is what I saw with this person in my life who was really addicted to ketamine, was like, he could not differentiate properly between what was a good hedged risk to take and I'm going to give everything up such that I can do this. He couldn't differentiate that there might be a difference there, and that like a person who is not on ketamine specifically might actually stop and go, let me reassess what I'm doing.
And we have a nice is maybe not the right word. We have a very stark image now to carry with us for the next 3 to 4 years or so, where Elon, I think it was standing at one of Trump's addresses early in Trump's second term here, where his head and his eyes are rolling. And not only is that a kind of dissociation, as you're saying, but it pulls him out of context while leaving him in the place of power.
Yeah, I mean, he really, I think you get an image of him in that moment of what it really means to be orbiting a K-hole at all times, right? Is that he is in this place of power. He's the king's eunuch, essentially. I've heard lots of rumors about there being weird sexual things in terms of his actual anatomy. That's not what I'm really talking about, but it's all psychosexual. But he really is the king's eunuch, right? He is that thing. He is in that kind of power. And he was, I'm sure he still remains, I haven't checked, but he is the richest man in the world. He has nearly unlimited power, and he has used it to basically over-leverage himself politically. And because he's not seeing that differentiation, could actually lose the financial power in service of the political power, which is potentially more real. We're going to find out. We're really going to find out where the difference actually lies in these two things with Musk, I think.
And I don't have my finger on this pulse in particular, and maybe either one of you do, but I wonder what those people who supported Musk, let's say in the days that he was in the Iron Man films, for example, up until now, in the past, arguably, Elon was seen favorably amongst at least some liberals. But now he's kind of an archetypal, overblown version of like your libertarian startup guy working out of the garage, but now the garage that he's in is the executive branch. I wonder what the evolution of folks' perception has been for those people who've continued to support him. Like, what are the justifications? I mean, clearly those people who bought a Tesla at some point, I mean, there's people even in my community who have the / Elon stickers on the back, and like, I bought this before he was a Nazi and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is just another instance of this sort of historyless liberal, right? Who they have this idea that there is this really substantial change that took place in Elon Musk. And some people date it to the pandemic. Some people date it to the beginning of 2020. Some people date it to this shift being around 2018 when Tesla was in serious trouble and basically was issuing a set of bonds on its electric vehicle credits and generating its own money, basically. They date it to different times where it seems like Elon kind of lost his mind or whatever. I mean, I'm sorry. I think this is a thing that is just part of him. And I think the idea that like, oh, I bought this Tesla before he was a Nazi, I mean, then you just don't know anything about history and about his personal history and what that means, what it means to grow up in apartheid, like what that fucking means. And ultimately, I think a lot of liberals were okay with that until it felt like it became untenable. And it felt like it became the case that he was interfering in their correct procedure fetish by being in some capacity, part of the administrative state. I don't know that I don't think liberals have a real grasp of what the problem is. They never seem to. They always seem to kind of be like, this is fine. This is kind of fine. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. Oh, it's suddenly not fine. Oh, my God, what happened? And neglect this whole lead up where you could have seen, and in fact, some of you could have even stepped in, but chose not to, in part because of the procedure fetish I mentioned, but also in part because like it felt to you like what began as $100,000 electric car was going to save the world. Like you could buy your way out of it in the same way that people think like you could eat your way out of being unhealthy.
The presentism of liberals mixed with consumerism as activism is just this utterly thought-terminating political disposition.
Well, nothing has changed about Musk, because back when they thought he was cool, they thought, well, yeah, he's like Tony Stark. I'm like, yeah, he's like Tony Stark. He's a man who wears his wealth like a suit of armor and sells weapons to the US government for their imperialists. And that's not changed in the slightest. He is still Tony Stark, and Tony Stark is still bad. So it's just like, as you said, it's a purity fetish, and it's masochism. It's masochism with people.
100%.
I mean,
they love it. Like, that's the other thing. Is like, remember that, like, I wish people remembered this more. Is like, these people do this, liberals, fascists, whatever. They're doing it because they like it. In the same way that we do. Like, we on the left, in communist, anarchist, whatever circles, we do this stuff because we like it. Like, that's not pretend. It sucks a lot, but that doesn't mean we don't like it. These liberals are the same. They do this because they like it. They like the Marvel movies. They like the idea. They enjoy the idea of there being a comic book hero brought to life. They love that. And, you know, I haven't watched a Marvel movie in I don't even know how long now, but when it comes to like Tony Stark, the opening of Iron Man and the new John Favreau oh my God, 20 years old now, but the opening of that Iron Man, how he gets caught in the fucking desert and ends up with this bullshit in his chest, is that he's selling weapons. What we mustn't forget is like liberals love the idea of killing people as bloodlessly as possible. They love this is where liberals really become sadists. Is they get through guys like this, like Elon Musk, through weapons manufacturing, they get the chance to say, you take on this responsibility of killing, and I will get to enjoy the fact that it has nothing to do with me. Or it feels like that anyway. It gives them the opportunity to delegate their enjoyment of fascism, of murder, of violence, of suffering, to this thing that makes it seem like the decision was correct and could be faultless and it's bloodless. That's what liberals do. That's what they like. And Elon is an avatar for this. You know, as he said in 2018, we will coup whoever we want. He has been telling you who he is. the whole time. So cards on the table, I was married to the child of white South Africans. Mea culpa. We're divorced now. I had argument after argument after argument after argument about Elon Musk with them. I was like, no, he's evil. This is in like 2012. I'm like, this man's evil. I don't care what he said. No, he's going to save the world. He ain't. I promise you, he's not. They really believed it. And these were liberal white South Africans who were like, yo, apartheid's bad, so on and so forth. They're not going to learn from this, the liberals. They don't want to learn because they like it. They love this shit.
That's why so many South Africans moved to Israel after apartheid ended.
Israel, Canada, Australia, all of these people, all the white people in those places, they are guilty until proven innocent. You have to, I'm sorry. This is where I become a race scientist. I need to know that you're not white South African. I need to know. Sorry.
Well, you either go Slovo or you
then you get a pass.
Yeah.
Then I'll listen to you. And that gets troubled now anyway. But let me show. The point I'm making though is that liberals don't want to learn. They're not interested in learning because they ultimately believe that this is the natural course of things. And these people like Elon Musk that design the smart weapons, all these things, or are part of how they get funded anyway, that he's a fucking idiot. This makes it the case that killing and suffering is right. Because something else made the decision for me, something else gets to decide, something else gets the blood on its hands, and I have nothing to do with it, except that I get to enjoy it. That's how they do it.
I guess I want to ask you more questions about drugs.
Yeah. Well, at the end,
I'm sure we'll get back to liberals.
It's only, that's the thing, is like, as much as this is about ketamine, it's also not, right? As much as it's about drugs, it's not. I have long been suspicious of this idea that like certain drugs will, expand your mind such that you will become, you will undergo ego death, which I don't know if you should want that, but you will undergo ego death such that you realize that you are part of everything and everything is part of you, and therefore you will take up the struggle. I don't see that happen very often. What I more often see among like non-elite drug, like psychedelic users, drug users in general, people become more atomized in their minds. It becomes more about their own self-expansion and their own ideas, and they don't really take up anything except doing more drugs, which, hey, I'm not judging you for that. I'm just simply saying that that's not, like, I don't think we can build some kind of left movement with just people on ayahuasca. I just don't think it'll work. I think ultimately people get too invested in the trip and don't get invested in like the hard, slow, plodding, and dangerous work of actually building towards something.
And that was actually my next question, because the effects of drugs that you're citing here mirror the logic of the ruling class. This incessant atomization effect. Granted, I don't want to discredit anybody's experience who did have that sort of ego death, collective experience. I'd love to hear in the comments about that sort of thing. What do you see as some possibilities for communal drug use in the future? Is there a way that we can think about using drugs as having a more collective character? Is there an attitude or a disposition that we need to take in order to achieve the kind of ego death which a lot of people, when they start using drugs, set out to do without going completely off the rails? In other words, how do we do drugs without succumbing to the kinds of atomization that we're already undergoing under capitalism and imperialism and so on?
Yeah, it's one of the few times I'm in a really just outright, I don't know, because I think like so many things that we want to be able to enjoy in a as part of a quote unquote good life, they require a lot to buttress them actually being good things. I don't know that you can. I don't know that you could like build a movement on this. Could a post movement, whatever the hell that means, because we've not reached it ever. Could like a post-movement kind of thing be a place for that kind of mind and self-expanding drug use? Hey, maybe. I've never been there. Can it be something more along the lines of sort of the low frequency drug use that like of the coca leaf in South America? Maybe, maybe that can be part of it, where it's like not really about mind expansion. It's about being calm through certain things, a little boost here, a little boost, maybe, but I don't know that is part of getting to where we want to get. I don't know that it is. I'm not saying it isn't 100%. I'm just saying I really don't know that it is. I'm a much bigger believer in certain kinds of ultimately discipline in terms of movements. I mean, there are reasons that, in a lot of parties, formations and so on, sex and drugs are banned or are heavily discouraged among comrades. I don't know that it's always necessary, but it tends to be the most successful or the most disciplined in that way, because there's a certain kind of organization and seriousness alongside not taking certain kinds of stupid risks. And if you're taking a drug that makes certain kinds of risks seem like a good idea, you're going to run out of track quickly, and you become a liability. And so, like, that's a long way to say I don't know, but I don't know. I really don't. And again, it's not to say don't do drugs. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying do them either. I'm just saying, if you want, but like, let's not pretend that doing drugs is a political project, unless you're Elon Musk, and then it is a political project, and you see where that leads.
Yeah. The last time leftists thought doing drugs was praxis, we ended up with Nick Clans. People, come on.
But this is what I'm saying, right? It's like the people who do drugs as political projects have not been on our side. Hitler was a methamphetamine addict. Churchill was drunk all the time, to the point where the idea of starving Bengal didn't seem that bad.
That's just being British now at that point.
That is just being British, which is its own. I'm sure that island can drive you crazy.
Man, I've had plenty of doses being on this podcast.
We're not an island. We're an archipelago of ideas above our station. This is a...
But like, oh my God. But yeah, like the idea of drug use as a political project has been Hitlerian. It's been Nick Land. It's Elon Musk. It's not produced great things. It's not for our side. In fact, it's produced really scary things. And so I would urge us to maybe consider that when, we center doing drugs.
You're familiar with Deleuze's essay on drug use, right?
Oh, no. Not.
Oh, that's what you should look at.
It's time for me to read it, because I am considering writing about drugs, about guys who are thinking of doing drugs.
When I read what you wrote, I thought you had read it based on what you had written. So it's definitely worth
awesome.
Taking a look.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the general ideas from that is, from Deleuze's standpoint, we should deeply interrogate the desire to warp, shift phenomenology without changing any of the other determinants that inform that phenomenology. And it almost, in some sense, mirrors, in a very oblique way, the critique of phenomenology from the post-structuralist position.
I love that. I love that he's such a part of me that I don't know how this happened. My nails aren't long for the same reasons, and I'm not a Frenchman, so I don't know, but I will absolutely have to read that. That sounds so perfect. I love it.
Yeah, and if anybody's listening, I think I said it's in the Two Regimes of Madness collection from Semiotext. Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, let me ask you a question that might make Deleuze roll over in his grave. I was actually very interested in your dreams that you had in relation to ketamine.
Yeah.
And I'd actually like to talk about them, because I think they're very poignant And also they're illustrative of some of the themes in this essay that you've written. And I would just like you to tell us the two dreams that you had and the sort of sense of caution and maybe even trepidation about, going further into the K-hole, as it were.
Yeah. I know this isn't live, thank God. So I'm going to have to refresh myself on my dreams because brass tacks, I wrote this in the weeks after my dad died. And so there was it was a very intense time. So I have to refresh precisely what I said.
Oh, go for it. Yeah. I'll just cut this part out or whatever.
Let me see. Oh God. Okay. Yeah, no. As soon as I knew I would, as soon as I saw it, it would come back. Okay. Oh shit. So yeah, holy fuck. So the first one, dream, these are let's be real, these are hallucinations, right? I'm hallucinating because ketamine, if you take enough of it, does produce a genuine psychedelic effect. It can make you not just dissociate, but hallucinate for sure. And the first dream is I was suddenly in this city. And if anybody's ever been to Barcelona, it was kind of like this, these very wide open boulevards and so on. And not like a city like we think of here in the United States or in England for that matter. Like not just open boulevards, trees. It's designed in such a way so that the light is really captured and these streets don't get dark. That's what Barcelona always feels like to me. And so I'm in this city. It's shimmering, it's gold, it's bright, it's beautiful. And there is this enormous building as I move down one of these boulevards, this enormous building. And there is, sitting on the raised pedestal, is this two-faced God. And, or what can only be described as a God. I don't know. But two faces that each are looking 45 degrees. So there's this sort of space in the middle where ostensibly I couldn't see anything except peripheral stuff. And that's where I stood. And the assumption is that it couldn't quite see me, but there was also something that I wasn't quite ready to see yet. So as I get to the pedestal where this God is sitting, I'm suddenly back in back in LA. Hallucination over. Oh, I don't remember what I was actually doing. Not the point. That was the first one. The second one, I remember much more clearly because it still freaks me out a little bit. If any, I have to say this as a disclaimer. Don't do a ton of Benadryl. Don't do that shit.
I was going to ask you if Benadryl was involved because it seemed like a Hat Man fantasy.
That's the thing is no. I actually won't even take Benadryl for allergies anymore, like as an antihistamine, because I have been hearing through like a set of peer-reviewed studies that it causes dementia. So I'm just like, you know what? I don't need that in my life. There are other antihistamines to take, but Benadryl, I really don't recommend taking it recreationally because you can have these very weird hallucinations in part. And the Hat Man is one of them. But then the next hallucination I had on ketamine, I was in the same apartment as how it began, and sort of in the distance, looking out onto a part of LA, in the distance, but not too far, I could see a figure standing there. There was maybe half a mile away, there was maybe a little more than that, something like that. There was a building that you could sort of see the roof, and if people were working on it, you could see that there were figures. This was a bigger figure than just like a person. And it was a totally dark, blacked out figure. And this was a thing I knew I did not want to see me. I may not have been ready for the two-faced God to see me, and so I was sort of standing in the middle and only peripheral to it. This was the thing I did not want to actually turn its focus at, to look at me. And I could see it totally clearly. And as it started to turn to look at me, I threw myself on the ground and hid because I was so afraid. You know, these are encounters with my own psychic infrastructure in a lot of ways. And there's something I absolutely do not want to pay attention to me. But at the same time, there is something I do want to pay attention to me. Like, it is a paradox in that there's something I want to see me and something I don't. And they may ultimately be the same thing. It's just whether they can see me in the right time and place, like that city, or the wrong one in the life where I'm not ready to be seen yet. So those are my two hallucinations. I know it's really interesting to listen to people talk about their trips, but seeing that second one that I did not want to see me, that was the last time I did ketamine, almost 2 years ago, I think. It's like there's something that I don't need to explore here. This is not for me anymore.
And it's almost as if that series of dreams, after seeing that second image, that kind of completes the sequence, and the decision was not to do it again,
right.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I am not a certified psychoanalyst. I read the literature, folks, but I would love to talk about it because I think, and there's something that I got from the retelling of it here that I didn't necessarily pick up on in the piece, which is it's almost like a syzygy in the sense that you have these opposing poles. The figures that you see are so very opposite in some sense. You know, you have this magnanimous, techno-ascendant, colossus-type figure in your dream world Barcelona. It has two faces, so there's a doubling there, and of course there's a doubling of these figures as well.
Yeah.
The one thing that unifies them is a lack of recognition, or at least a line of sight directed at you, the ego, the dream ego, or the hallucination ego,
Sure.
anyway. And what I find particularly interesting about the Colossus dream is that there is a sense of sight, detection, awareness, but it's completely peripheral. There is no face. There's no singular face. There's two faces. But then when we get to the other figure, this is another figure who's obscured, but in a different way. And despite the absence of a clear or stark face, there's a way in which perhaps you are perceived ever more strongly.
Yeah, and that is something that I had to think about between, suspended between these two figures that ultimately could be the same thing, and there's no way to know. But is that, on the one hand, there's a figure that could look at me but isn't, and one that is about to, and I don't want it to. You know, that was part of what was latent in this feeling of the second one, is his gaze was coming. He was just about to turn toward me. I know it in some way, whatever knowledge means in a trip.
Oh, I just think it's fascinating, honestly. I mean, I was speaking to a friend just before, it was in prep for this episode, who was also done sort of a fair amount of ketamine, just put it lightly. And he said, yeah, I always see like techno-utopias. And he always, and it's just so interesting how, when you say as well in the essay that, you know, one can gaze back at oneself in the way that one might scroll through one's Instagram, and there's that sort of dividing of the self, that vision, sort of in ways sort of remote viewing of the self that happens in the ketamine trip, which it seems like it maps on so directly to a fully digitized subjectivity when you're inherently split between the account and the contents. It's quite surprising. It's actually Hegelian, which makes sense given what Hegel ends up doing with his system, which is racism, folks. If you get to the encyclopedia, it's just naturalized racism. It's sorry, but that's just what's in the book. And in terms of the roots for psychoanalysis, one of the really interesting points in the essay as well, you say that, quote, the space that ketamine opens for the user could be one of unleashed repressed material, erupting to the surface for viewing without transference and without symptom. And then when it comes to sort of the question of psychoanalytic analysis, what happens? Do you think there's sort of a really strong implication for psychoanalysis and sort of the analysis of, if we want to do like a new psychology of fascism or a new male fantasies, what happens when we remove those aspects of transference and symptom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and this is the thing is, I think there is real potential to analyze not just men, but men for sure, with the use of these drugs. I think that is definitely the case. The thing about it is currently where we are, it doesn't really produce like wild analysis, right? What it ends up kind of doing is releasing repressed material with no guardrail and no analytic situation, no time limit, and no clinic. So you unleash these things in yourself, and whatever they may be, you get the chance to pick through this potentially repressed material or symbolized versions of this repressed material, and very little scope to actually analyze and interpret it. That's part of what the analyst is meant to do in interpreting is sort of put certain kinds of guardrails back on in one's own encounters with the unconscious as it like erupts forth, right? It's not the only thing that they do, but it's part of it. It's part of it to ensure that things that are repressed, that reappear, what they're doing is rejoining sort of the stream of history rather than erupting into the present all the time through a symptom and, forcing the analyst to suffer their symptom.
It reminds me a little bit of something that apparently Hegel said, this might be apocryphal, that comes from the name of the cigarette brand American Spirit, which apparently comes from the founder of the company who was at one of his lectures. And apparently he said that, everyone's like, this is the national spirit of this country, it's the national spirit of this country. And then they say, what's the American one? He's like, tobacco is the American spirit. Turns out it's ketamine.
Turns out it might be something closer to ketamine. Yeah. That's just it, right? And the distrust of analysis in the United States, no matter what the psychosocial foundation, who is meeting currently, has to say about it. I mean, analysis in the United States is very troubled and has been for a very long time. I mean, Freud was famously frightened of this place, correctly.
America was a mistake.
When Freud was going there, he said to Jung, was it Ferenczi, we're bringing the plague. And it's really interesting to talk about actually the shift in how America receives psychoanalysis, because industrial psychoanalysis, and maybe I'm just repeating Adam Curtis verbatim here, was like so essential that Betty Crocker mix, there's a reason why you have to put an egg in it. You don't need to, but it was meant to be some sort of Edward Bernays. I mean, but these were all kinds of guardrails to channel people into the consumer economy. And it seems like, as you said, that there's a shift towards ketamine, which in a way is in many ways it is kind of an easy way. It's the fast path for psychoanalysis, to the extent that there are ketamine therapies everywhere. Is this kind of the new relationship? Is this the new paradigmatic relationship of the American subject to their own psyche, as exemplified by their billionaire class? Yeah,
it's fucking libertarian psychoanalysis, right? Like that's what ketamine really is. It's libertarian psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis that the only rule is some kind of strange idea about non-aggression, and everything else can fuck itself. That's the truth. I can go and dig through my psyche alone with no training, no licenses, and no accreditation fetish. But digging through a psyche is something to be done with care and with attention, training potentially. I don't know, but just releasing repressed material is a dangerous game. And it's a dangerous game to do, first of all, by yourself. Basically, affirming that there is no necessary social link, and not only is there no necessary social link, there is no social link. We should never try to traverse that lack of social link. We should never try to be social. What we should do is pick through our own minds and release whatever we find there. And so Is it surprising that, for example, and I'm not linking this to ketamine to be fair, but it's like, this indirect stuff. Is it surprising, for example, that there is one guy in the San Fernando Valley making pornography that decided, hey, I'm into incest porn, and then suddenly incest porn was everywhere. And it's not even that the porn itself is incestuous, but instead that that's how it was labeled, and that's how it got a number of years ago, right? This is the same kind of mechanic, is one person having a certain kind of desire and enjoyment that never did refuse to have guardrails put on examining what this all means, and unleashed it on everybody. I don't think this is a good thing. I think this is a bad thing, actually. And this is what you see in a guy like Musk, is it's released repressed material from his father, I don't know, apartheid, I don't know. Someone wrote a piece about how the Cybertruck looks like the Casper, which was like a military vehicle that was that patrolled townships in South Africa. And it evokes it. Does it look the same? No, of course not. But it evokes it, sure. Dealing with these people's and Musk is a person who has the power to take that repressed material, unleash it, and enact what it demands. And this is a thing we should be careful of, I think, personally. Is just like this, libertarian analysis. Oh my God, all we would be dealing with are people's just unrestrained psyches. It sounds awful. And what is X now but that?
The one common thread, I think, even between your dream, between the sort of general political analysis we're putting forward here and this characterization of Elon Musk is there's a sense in which the image, quote unquote, in the context of Elon Musk's quote unquote vision for society is devoid of a kind of ethical force. It's pretty much about instrumentality and a notion of progress that's completely vacuous. It's stripped of any humanitarian element. It's devoid of anything that would provide social uplift for the oppressed classes. It's a purely ego-driven sort of thing. And there are people like Gina Carano who are trying to redeem his image online. But going back to your dream, for example, look at the world of AI. We now live in a context where there's an absolute proliferation of these images 24/7 by self-elected users of Midjourney and so forth. And I've been one of those people at one time because I had an incredible curiosity about it. And now it's just absolutely everywhere. But the notion that, the concept of an AI image, I think flies in the face of the image with a capital I. When we look at something like your dreams, those images came at you with a kind of ethical force and a warning that AI images, simply don't do. And here again, I say that Deleuze would be rolling over in his grave. I'm saying that we abandon the nomadism and the hallucinations of the AI world in favor of finding where there are these more salient protrusions from the imaginary and grab onto them or tarry with them in a way. And clearly that field is so saturated now, I can scarcely imagine something like your dream coming out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about, okay, so I have a lot of feelings and thoughts about AI itself for various reasons. I think we all do. Some of them have to do with my career, and what that means for my work moving forward. Some of them have to do with, the building of data centers. Some of it has to do with, this financial gamble on nonsense. And some of it has to do with things like lavender. So I have lots of feelings about AI. But one of the things that I know in my spirit is that AI can hallucinate, but it can't have a nightmare. It's not going to dream. It does not have an unconscious. And thus, it is not an intelligence. Like, it isn't. It is pure artificiality. And then in terms of the images it makes, that people are like, oh, that's, people who are living this sort of social media life, or you see it sometimes still, where it's like, oh, this is art, like artists, blah, blah. Fucking not. There is no possible ethicality there. There is no tarrying with an ethics. There is no tarrying with anything that might suggest you're dealing with something that has anything to say. So, in terms of these images that are emergent out of AI, I mean, I'm sorry, all they are is it's just surveillance technology. All you're doing is training it to be able to look for Palestinians, and then Black people, and then, that's all you're doing. Even if you're making images that are like these combinations of, fucking Picasso and Marvel, this is what you're doing. You're training surveillance technology. You're training military technology. And you're training it a thing that has no capacity for ethics. None, because it is a weapon already. That's what you're doing. That's what you're taking part in. And when you think the outputs of that shit, it is in some way realer than real, or it's art, or you are ultimately, what you're revealing is that, like, you don't know the difference between image and reality at all. You don't have, there is something that has taken place in you, that there is a breakdown between the idea of imaginary, symbolic, real, and this other thing, the irreal. There is a breakdown. You cannot tell the difference between any of them. You do not know that there is the capacity for a symbolic world. You do not know that the imaginary is not real, and that you have no access to the real. And so you live in this irreal space all the time. And it feels like it might be real, but it's not. What's real is the fact that you are training military technology. That's what's real. That's the hardcore of the dream, is that there is a thing that can see me that I do not want to see me. Because if it sees me, it will kill me. And if it sees me, it will kill other people. That is the ultimate real of what we're dealing with at the end of the day. Is the thing, as soon as it sees me, I'm dead. You do not want these things to see you.
I mean, just yes to everything that you've just said, Taija. That's yes. Every single one of these machines feeds back into Palantir, and they feed back into Israel. They're all sharing these technologies with each other, and these things. Maybe you could say, okay, well, it's just all humans doing it. It is, but that's because these human structures are structured like an AI to just do the most basic pattern recognition. I mean, people. If you are a Latin American man with tattoos in the United States, the U.S. government is actively doing so. Say, I saw one guy. I mean, I heard on a different podcast, Trash Future. One guy who's picked up having a Real Madrid tattoo, said that he was part of some Venezuelan gang. He is then sent to Nayib Bukele's fucking slave camp, because that's what it is. That's why California didn't vote to ban prison slavery, because they've established a new slave trade, which they would have had internally, because, act accordingly, folks. And these machines will only be used for this. They are this. This is what they are. This is why they have speaking of ketamine and VR, it's why that even sort of seemingly quite well-meaning charities are strapping VR headsets made by Oculus, whose owner is Palmer Luckey, who is the owner of Anduril, to people in solitary confinements.
Like, not to force myself to have a last word here, but like, we're actually in a really serious moment. And like the jokes about ketamine, Elon Musk's a fucking loser, this, that, and the third thing. You know what? That's true. This is an aspect of it. But the thing that is actually really important is that we're in a really, really dangerous time, period. I'm not trying to oversell it. It's a really dangerous time. And ultimately, this AI stuff, this rise of AI, what it is doing is the same thing as what I was mentioning with the sort of liberal delegation to people like Elon Musk. It is making sadistic decisions that are then understood as the only way because the computer made them, and the computer can't be wrong. That is what this all is at the end of the day. And ketamine can power and accelerate the idea that computer can't be wrong. But believe me, computer can't be wrong. And they will kill you. That's the truth.
And yeah, and on that note, I mean, Taija, do you have anything else coming out soon? Where can people find your work? You know, what's going on? I mean, of course, we're going to link the King Ketamine below.
Yeah. So what's happening with me? So I am recovering after, as I mentioned, some deaths and some real personal trials and tribulations. So my first new stuff will start to emerge at the end, probably towards the end of the summer, where I've been deep in reading about somebody who I think is actually very important, the Marquis de Sade. I actually think he might end up being the key to some of this stuff, which is not what I wanted to find out, but here we are. So I'm working on a piece on sadism right now, which will ultimately be part of the book. I myself have a very silly podcast about the Real Housewives franchise. So if you ever want to listen to that, it's called Not Above It, where I talk about Real Housewives as though it is some kind of philosophical object with a lawyer. So that's Not Above It. And then otherwise, I'm getting ready to start a real job, which means I'm supposed to be behaving myself and I'm supposed to be being a good little girl, PhD. So stuff will be coming, but mostly you can just follow me on X, the Everything app, and see what I'm joking about there.
On that basis, cheers everyone for listening.